Good evening, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Hugh Stewart and I'm bringing you the news tonight at Scotland at 7. That's what we call the programme. Sorry we're late tonight. We were trying to connect to our special guest who I'm afraid we're not going to be able to bring you. So let's hope we can arrange that for a future occasion. So today I'm just going to read through our top stories, which tonight will cover the rail strike hitting the UK and also affecting Scotland. More of that in a couple of minutes. But first I'm going to update on the latest from Ukraine on day 154 of Russia's attack on their neighbours. A key Russian-held bridge in the southern occupied city of Kherson has been hit by a barrage of rocket fire from Ukrainian forces who appear to be stepping up operations to isolate the city. Video and witness accounts showed up to 18 detonations on the Antonivsky Bridge over the Dnieper River, one of the main Russian resupply routes into Kherson. One person has been killed and 4 wounded in the Russian attack on a hotel in Bakhmut in the Donetsk region, according to local emergency services and the regional governor. The UK's Ministry of Defence has said that Russian private military company Wagner has likely succeeded in making tactical advances in the Donbass around the Volhyriska power plant and in the nearby village of Novoluhansk. Some Ukrainian forces have likely withdrawn from the area. Russian forces continue to strike civilian infrastructure in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, and in the surrounding region in the country's northeast. Regional Governor Oleh Senihubov said the strikes on the city resumed around dawn on Tuesday. Russia has lost almost 40,000 soldiers since launching its latest invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, President Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed in his nightly address to Ukraine. This number of casualties has not been verified. The headquarters overseeing exports of Ukrainian grain has been unveiled in Istanbul today, and a senior Turkish official said the first ship is likely to depart the Black Sea ports in a few days. The Joint Coordination Centre in Istanbul will oversee departures from 3 Ukrainian ports. All vessels pass through Turkish waters on their way to the Mediterranean. Ukraine's Navy confirmed on Wednesday today that work has started on 3 Ukrainian Black Sea ports aimed at preparing for the resumption of grain exports. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko has said the Turkish brokered the deal to unblock Ukrainian grain exports on the Black Sea could collapse if obstacles to Russia's agricultural exports are not promptly removed. Insurance uncertainty poses the biggest obstacle to grain ships leaving Ukraine's Black Sea ports this week, according to exporters. The first train with sanctioned goods has arrived from Russia to Kaliningrad via Lithuania in the first such trip since the European Union said that Lithuania must allow Russian goods across its territory, according to the regional governor. The train reportedly consisted of 60 freight cars loaded with cement. And now on to our top story today, the rail strike. Most train services in Scotland could not run today due to a UK-wide strike by the RMT and TSSA unions in dispute with Network Rail, the track stations and signalling authority run by the UK Department of Transport. Jenny Gilruth, Scotland's Transport Secretary, called for all parties to work together to find a resolution. The Scottish Government owns ScotRail, which operates the train services here, but is not involved in the running of Network Rail. The strike is about working conditions and pay. Facing a drop in passenger numbers since COVID, Network Rail management wants to bring in changes such as closing most ticket offices and replacing some rail maintenance staff with drones to check the condition of the rail track. Unions say these moves are both an attack on jobs and on passenger safety, which management denies. On pay, rail unions expect inflation in the UK to top 11% and are seeking to mitigate this with pay demands of 7%. Management has offered 2%, with a further 1% on offer, following agreements on those new ways of working, which will include job cuts. UK Transport Minister Grant Shapps has used this first in a series of planned UK rail strikes as an opportunity to suggest ways of changing the laws on workers' right to strike. Writing earlier in the London newspaper, Mr Shapps suggested a legal maximum on the number of pickets at any workplace and a ban on intimidatory language, as he put it. He also suggested that strikes may not be legal unless at least 50% of the members voted. Altogether, the minister has proposed 16 new anti-trade union measures. Commenting, TUC's General Secretary Francis O'Grady said, "These proposals are an attack on the fundamental right to strike. They are anti-democratic and anti-worker. Threatening the right to strike tilts the balance of power too far towards employers. It means workers can't stand up for decent services and safety at work or defend their jobs and pay." Labour MP for Ilford South Sam Parry attended the picket line at London Euston Station today, in spite of orders from UK Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer for frontbench MPs not to attend. And we heard shortly just before going on air that Sam Parry has now been sacked as Labour's spokesperson on transport for giving several media interviews from the picket line. Several other Labour MPs supported the strike, including Mick Whitley, the MP for Birkenhead, who attended the picket line at Lime Street Station, Liverpool. In Glasgow, the SNP's MP for Glasgow South West, Chris Stevens, joined the picket at Glasgow Central Station. Further UK rail strikes are planned for the 30th of July and then for the 18th and the 20th of August. And just further on that story, notice several Labour MPs on Twitter tonight have expressed their solidarity both for the rail workers and for Sam Parry. For example, Richard Burton and Rebecca Long-Bailey. I also note that Zara Sultana, who is a Labour MP for Coventry, has said that Labour should always support workers, the clues in the name. And our second story tonight, on the Public Accounts Committee looking at the awarding of COVID contracts to a company called Randox. Ministers and government officials played fast and loose when awarding £777 million of COVID contracts to a healthcare firm which employed the Conservative MP Owen Paterson, former MP Owen Paterson, as a lobbyist. This was the Parliamentary Spending Watchdog, the PAC. In a damning report, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee, the PAC, concluded that the government made a series of failures, making it impossible to know if the contracts had been awarded properly to Randox. The Department of Health and Social Care did little to deal with the potential conflicts of interest, despite clear concerns about Randox's political connections, the cross-party committee of MPs found. It added that officials were aware that Mr Patterson had been in direct contact with Matt Hancock, who was then Health Secretary, while promoting Randox. The MPs on the PAC found that Randox made substantial profits after it was given the contracts to carry out COVID testing during the pandemic. The firm's profits in the year to June 2021 were more than 100 times greater than the previous year, according to the PAC, which questioned whether those were excessive. The publication of the report comes after Randox and Owen Paterson were accused of cronyism in parliamentary debates. Randox paid Mr Paterson, who was then the MP for North Shropshire, £100,000 a year. The former Cabinet Minister was forced to resign from Parliament last November after he wrongly used his parliamentary position to lobby for his clients, including Randox. The SNP's Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary Martin Day MP said the awarding of those contracts stinks to high heavens and attacked the Tories' record of sleaze and corruption under the outgoing law-breaking Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Commenting, Martin Day MP said, "This all stinks, and of course it's not the first time the Tories awarding of COVID contracts has come into question. It's clear that these incidents are not in any way isolated. The UK government's record of sleaze and scandal has been well documented throughout Boris Johnson's tenure. It's endemic within the Conservative Party." That was SNP's MP Martin Day commenting on the excessive profits of Randox, which had a very good COVID. Our next story on the IMF forecasting UK will have the slowest growth of all G7 countries in 2023. The International Monetary Fund has said that the global economy could soon be teetering on the brink of recession, amid evidence that the world's three biggest economies are all stalling and inflation is higher than previously forecast. In a downbeat update to its April World Economic Outlook, the IMF has cut its growth forecasts in 22 and 23 and raised the prospect of a more pronounced slowdown. The UK is forecast to grow by 3.2% in this year, but by only 0.5% in 2023. And those are cuts of 0.5 and 0.7% from previous estimates. The IMF expects the UK to slow down markedly in the second half of this year and to be the weakest of the G7 economies in 2023. Now, I have the IMF's figures here, so let me just put that into context. So for 2023, the IMF expects the whole of the world economy to grow by 2.9%. And in the Eurozone, the countries which take the euro are expected to grow by 1.2%. And remember, the UK growth figures will be 0.5% according to these estimates. In fact, looking down the list, I can see only one country with slower growth than the UK, and that's Russia, which is expected to shrink by minus 3.5%. So commenting on those poor growth figures, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor Alison Thulis MP said, "Under Westminster rules, Scotland's economy will continue to suffer, with the UK set for the slowest growth of all G7 economies next year, and both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss offering no credible solution that leaves Scotland with only one option. As set out in the Scottish Government's independence papers, smaller independent European nations continue to outperform the UK in economic and social league tables. That's why there can be no doubt that the only way to build a fairer and more prosperous society and regain our place within the EU is to become an independent country." Okay, that was Alison Thulis MP for the Scottish National Party reporting on those slow growth figures, especially slow growth in the UK. Now, turning to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss competing to be the Prime Minister of the UK. Today, Rishi Sunak, one of the two candidates for Prime Minister, has promised to scrap VAT on household fuel bills for a year to tackle the cost of living crisis in a dramatic U-turn as he battles to remain in the race to become the next UK Prime Minister. With Liz Truss promising £30 billion in immediate tax cuts, Mr Sunak has repeatedly stressed the risks of unfunded promises and insisted that he has already taken action to cushion the blow of the sharp increase in domestic energy bills which are expected in October. As he continues to trail the Foreign Secretary in the polls of Conservative Party members, and with ballot papers landing in Conservative doorsteps within days, he announced a new handout worth £160 for every household, despite having previously condemned this policy. The new pledge came as analysis by the think tank the Resolution Foundation suggested that personal tax cuts, such as those being promised by Liz Truss, are not a serious answer to the cost of living crisis. They said rising energy bills will bite hardest for low and middle income households this winter, but only 15% of the cost of scrapping national insurance would go to the poorer half of the population, while 28% would go to the top 25%, the think tank says. After the pair, Truss and Sunak squared off repeatedly over tax and spend in Monday's bad-tempered BBC leadership debate, a snap poll of Tory members by YouGov suggested that 50% thought that Liz Truss performed better against 39% for Mr Sunak. On dealing with the cost of living crisis, 55% thought that Truss was better against 34% for Sunak. More on energy bills now. Home energy bills in the UK could soar to £3,850 a year from January, after Russia further squeezed Europe's gas supplies, according to a forecast that would spell further misery for people already struggling to afford gas and electricity. The prediction, which some industry sources say should be treated with caution, follows as a surge in European gas prices from Russia's cut to flows of gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. The energy-focused management consultancy BFY said it now expected October's price cap to hit $3,420, while a subsequent rise in January could be as high as £3,850. That's per year. That would mean that home energy bills would have tripled in the space of a year, given that the cap was set at £1,271 at the beginning of this year. BFY said the average consumer could end up facing a bill of £500 in January alone. One source at a major power producer said they thought the forecast was surprisingly high, with the figure likely to be closer to 3,300, already predicted by the energy analysis firm Cornwall Insight. Cornwall is expected to update its own predictions, factoring in the fresh European gas price increases early next week. The BFY prediction will pile pressure on the UK government to give more help to struggling households. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who is vying with Liz Truss to become the next UK Prime Minister, said this week he would temporarily scrap the 5% VAT on domestic energy bills. If bills do rise as high as the BFY predicts, that would save the average household £192, compared with the increase over the last year of more than £2,500. Excuse me. Our next story on benefit reductions. Ministers' policy of clawing back hundreds of pounds a year from benefits have been criticised by MPs who say it has tipped low-income families into destitution. About 2.4 million households, that's nearly half of all claimants on universal credit, have an average £62 docked each month to repay benefit advances, tax credit overpayments, and debts owed to landlords or utility companies. With energy and food prices soaring and benefit levels pegged way below inflation, the deductions often leave struggling households without enough money to afford food or to pay their bills, forcing some claimants to turn to food banks to survive. The Commons Cross-Party Work and Pensions Select Committee urged ministers to give households extra breathing space by suspending all benefit deductions until inflation dropped to a manageable level or until benefits were increased to accurately reflect living costs. Stephen Timms, the Labour chair of the committee, said deductions by the DWP from benefits are contributing to the hardship, and the government should give those struggling some much-needed breathing space by following its own advice to other creditors and pausing the repayments until the threat of inflation recedes. The committee noted that while the government has urged creditors to accept reduced monthly payments from households battling the cost of living crisis, it isn't following its own advice when it comes to deductions levied as a result of government policy rather than individuals' behaviour. The bulk of benefit reductions are for advance payments made to the new universal credit claimants introduced to help tide them over the built-in 5-year wait for that first payment. These are interest-free but must be repaid from future benefit payments. Although the committee broadly welcomed the government's cost of living support package, it said the highest rate of inflation seen in the UK for 40 years, predicted to hit 11% by October, has exposed long-standing problems about the adequacy of the UK's social security system. Over to America for our next story now. Today, US House Democrats have introduced a bill to establish term limits for Supreme Court justices after an unprecedented term in which the highest court in America produced a series of deeply conservative rulings upending American law. In June, the Supreme Court dominated the 6-3 Republican-dominated court overturned the right to abortion. It also issued consequential rulings on gun control, on the environment, and on other controversial issues. The Supreme Court Tenure Establishment and Retirement Modernisation Act would establish 18-year terms for Supreme Court justices and establish a process for the new president establish a process where the president could appoint a new justice every 2 years. After an 18-year term, justices would then be retired from active judicial service. If this bill were to take effect, the 9 justices currently on the court would essentially be forced into senior status in order to reverse seniority, as jurists were appointed under the new mechanism. Supreme Court justices are currently appointed for life. The US stands alone as the only advanced democracy that doesn't have either a fixed term or a mandatory retirement age for judges on its highest court. The bill is unlikely to gain bipartisan support, as Republicans have vigorously shot down any previous attempts to change the makeup of the Supreme Court. Even if the measure passed the Democrat-controlled House, it would probably die in the Senate, where it would need the vote of 10 Republicans, in addition to all the Democrats, to overcome the filibuster. Despite pressure from Democrats, President Biden has also not indicated any support for changing the way appointments are made, rejecting the idea of expanding the number of justices on the court. A panel commissioned by President Biden last year explored implementing term limits as one of a number of reforms to the Supreme Court. It noted that the idea is one that has enjoyed considerable bipartisan support. Exploring arguments for and against the practice, the panel noted that opponents of term limits argue they could have unintended consequences, including making the court more political. Confidence in the Supreme Court is at a record low. Just 25% of Americans have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the court, according to a June poll by Gallup. Eleanor Kagan, appointed to the court by Barack Obama, said last week that if the court loses all connection with the public and with the public sentiment, that's a dangerous thing for a democracy. Some historical news now in one of the most iconic battles in Scotland's history, and one which holds a particularly poignant place in the national consciousness. Now, over 275 years later, the Battle of Culloden is still revealing its secrets. Historic Environment Scotland, that's HES, has uncovered new evidence for the location of Culloden Park's designed landscape around the Culloden House, which was an important element of the battlefield landscape of Culloden in 1746, thought to have been lost. Culloden House played a key role in the conflict as a headquarters for Bonnie Prince Charlie and his Jacobite commanders in the days leading up to the battle. The investigation by the HES has not only discovered new evidence which showed that Culloden Parks was situated further to the west of the traditional battlefield site than previously thought, but also that a significant amount of the boundary walls of the parks survive. This finding has a significant bearing on the current understanding of the battlefield landscape and the battle itself. The Jacobites used the southern end of Culloden Parks as their left flank when they deployed for the battle, meaning that the Jacobite left flank must also have occupied a more westerly position than was previously believed. Culloden is one of the most important battles in the history of Scotland. It was the last pitched battle fought on the UK mainland, and a total and bloody defeat for the Jacobites at the hands of the butcher Cumberland. The battlefield itself is one of the most visited tourist sites in the Highlands, and the site holds a particularly high significance and emotional connection to many within Scotland and to the ancestors of the Scottish diaspora around the world. And sad news tonight, James Lovelock, scientist and the creator of the Gaia hypothesis, has died on his 103rd birthday. The climate scientist died at home on Tuesday, surrounded by loved ones, his family said. Mr. Lovelock, who was one of the UK's most respected independent scientists, had been in good health until 6 months ago when he had a bad fall. Known as something of a maverick, he'd been dispensing predictions from his one-man laboratory since the mid-1960s, and in his old age he continued to work. His Gaia hypothesis posits that life on Earth is a self-regulating community of organisms interacting with each other and their surroundings. He said 2 years ago that the biosphere, which supports all life, including you and me, was in the last 1% of its life. His family said, "Our beloved James Lovelock died yesterday in his home, surrounded by his family on his 103rd birthday. To the world he was known as a scientific pioneer, climate prophet, and the conceiver of the Gaia theory. To us, he was a loving husband and a wonderful father with a boundless sense of curiosity and a mischievous sense of humour and a passion for nature." And that's about it for tonight. So I'm sorry we weren't able to bring you out. We had an excellent guest lined up, but it wasn't actually possible to get a connection. So I'm disappointed that we didn't have a chance to meet him again, but we hope we will in the future. So thank you for watching the news tonight and for waiting if you're trying to get me live. So I'm Scotland at 7 for Wednesday, and I'd like to just finish by saying that everybody here in the team at Broadcasting Scotland is volunteering, and it's our aim to give Scotland the kind of unbiased, the kind of Scottish-based news which we feel isn't really available from the UK-based broadcasters. So if you'd like to help and if you're agreeing with our mission, please have a look at our website and you can become one of the hundreds of people who are supporting us, starting at just £5 a month. If you could manage a direct debit in spite of the price rises, we'd really appreciate that. That's our only source of income, and as I've said before, the more money we get in, the more we can do, the more interviews we can conduct, the more we can go out and meet people and bring news to you, and the more stories and the more programmes we can put out. So that's one way we'd invite you to help. And the other way, of course, is if you'd like to become a volunteer, if you have any skills that you think you can offer to Broadcasting Scotland, please get in touch. We're based in Glasgow, but you don't have to be. We do have the technology to take links from anywhere, although sadly not tonight from air, but usually we can report from around the world. We have actually done that on many occasions. So thanks for watching tonight, and if you can give us a hand in any of those ways, please get in touch. Okay, so I'm Hugh Stewart, and that was Scotland slightly after 7 on Wednesday the 27th. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. See you later.